Welcome to the Save Childhood podcast with Jennifer McCarville. Because childhood has changed, but children have not. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Save Childhood podcast.
I'm Jennifer McCarville.
And I'm Nicole Dugan. And today we are tackling a big topic, a fun topic, worksheets.
So fun.
Worksheets. Are they good? Are they bad? What is their role in early childhood education?
Can we say yes? They're good, they're bad. The good and the bad?
The good and the bad.
The good and the bad.
And what their role is.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think the first thing I looked up, what is a worksheet? Because when you think about a worksheet, you're like, is it something that you've made copies of? You know, like when I started in education and when we were children, you might remember the Ditto, where they put it on the mimeograph machine, and I used to love that, and the smell, everybody had to smell it, and the papers were still damp. Mm-hmm. Is it that where you make a copy, but now you do it in a very boring and efficient machine? Is that a worksheet? Is a worksheet a book that, something you pull out of a book because they're everywhere? Is a worksheet something that has maybe the life cycle of a pumpkin all mixed up and the children cut it out and put it in order? What exactly is a worksheet? Well, so I looked it up, and in the Merriam-Webster's has 5 definitions of worksheets. So there really are a lot of things that can mean worksheet. Okay. So the one that we're referring to for educational purposes is a sheet of paper on which are printed exercises and problems to be solved by a student. So, printed paper, a sheet of paper that has printed exercises on it or problems to be solved. So those can be word problems. I think that worksheets often are associated with math.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about how that has its place.
Sure.
But one of the reasons that in early childhood specifically, we really avoid worksheets, and you'll have the, sweeping pronouncement of, we do no worksheets here, which is true at our school too. We don't do any worksheets in the preschool or in the kindergarten really. Well, actually, I might say we do some in the kindergarten as we talk about this. But we don't because, again, in our push down of academics in our society, very young children were expected to sit down at the ages of 3 and 4 and produce worksheets. In fact, I'll tell you, one of my very crystallizing moment when I decided I was going to figure out how to honor and respect the development of children when I became a teacher. I was a teenager. I was working in a child care facility, and I came in from 2 to 6 every day, and I had 15 3-year-olds by myself.
Okay.
And my job, when I came in, they were napping, so my job was to meet with the morning teacher. She would tell me what to do with them when they woke up, and then I would do that. So there was this one day in particular, it was a very common practice, but there was this one day in particular that the children had gotten up and they were all sitting down. They I think they'd had their snack. That part I'm not clear on. The point is, they're 3. They're all sitting in their chairs at these little tables, and I have a worksheet taped to the chalkboard, and my job is to teach them shapes by having them color these shapes, right? And all the children have their worksheet, and they're all just sitting there very sweetly, because children often will do really inappropriate things, because
to make you happy.
They want you to be happy, yeah. And they feel like you're showing them in the world what is important and what has value, and, they trust us. And so I'm standing there, and they're sitting there, and my job is to say, okay, find your red crayon and color the rectangle red. And I'm, of course, modeling for them, because clearly children need a model. They can't think for themselves. That is absolutely not true. So I'm modeling for them how to color the rectangle red. And I turn and I look, and they are so drained of joy. Drained of joy. I mean, there's no spark in their eye. Nobody's happy. And there was one child in particular, Precious, and when I looked at this child, that was the face I'll never forget. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm going to learn how to do this right. And so my journey began on learning how children grow and develop and what's the best way to meet them with an education that honors that development. So that's a perfect example, in my opinion, of why worksheets have a really bad rap with young children. Why in the world would you have 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds sitting down doing this? I mean, ick. If you know anything about development, you know that they've got to move. It has to be in the body before it can be in the brain. You know, we know this. So that's ludicrous. And so they really don't have a place for very young children. They just don't. Children are creative. They're able to draw their own pictures in their own time. They don't need something that, you know, a 35-year-old drew and made copies of so they can feel inadequate to draw a picture of a bear. I mean, Of course you draw better than they do, you know.
Right.
You get a few years on them.
Right. But knowing what we know, there are still a lot of places where worksheets are there, and parents and grandparents
love them.
Yeah, they love them. Let's talk about why people love them.
Okay, let's talk about that. One big reason, I think, for parents of young children is they share their children with the child care center. They share their child with the school. They miss being with them. They wish they could be, or they just want to know that their child's getting what they know they need and deserve. And so it's like a receipt for them. It's like, here's my tuition. Where's my proof of learning? And so, unfortunately, people responsible for children have taken advantage of that, in my opinion. So you have the inappropriate educational practice that people should know how children learn and honor that. That's a problem. Then you have the people who take care of children for profit and misuse that privilege by telling parents what they want to hear so that they'll entrust you with their children. And we've got to be very careful about that as well, right? It either means they're really trying to schmooze you, or they don't know themselves, you know? And so they're really trying to do good things, and they're like, look, here's what they did. Here's what they learned. I guarantee you very few of them really learned from coloring a worksheet or filling out a worksheet, or that's not the way our youngest children learn.
No.
So it's still a problem. So, but what are the other problems with them? Well, so the problems are that they don't encourage real thinking. You know, they're not engaging for children. Children need to be engaged. And really, this is at all ages. Learning, lessons, experiences should be in things you're involved with. Materials you're manipulating. They should be things that you get to interact with in a real way. Worksheets aren't real life, and real life is how we learn.
Right.
Real experiences. So those are some huge problems with them. We could also talk about the environmental impact worksheets have. We could talk about the fact that teachers use them to control classrooms. They're overwhelmed. You know, teachers are fantastic. We're always going to talk about how wonderful teachers are and what we need to do in the system. Now, of course, we have some teachers that aren't wonderful, just like any field has, but for the most part, right? But they're overwhelmed. And right. We get that, right? You have a classroom full of 34 children in first grade, second grade, and you can give them a worksheet, and most of them are semi-engaged. Right? So, but that's not healthy. That's not real learning, right? And so they limit thinking and creativity. They don't actually teach the way we know children learn.
Right.
I don't know if you can think of any other, negatives about worksheets, but those are some of them. They just don't engage them.
Yeah, waste of time, usually, for the most part.
Yeah, right. And they also are definitely your epitome of a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
Like, this is what you're going to have to do right here. And, we want children who can think, right?
What should young children be doing instead of sitting down to do a worksheet?
What age do we want to talk about?
Well, let's first talk about the preschool ages 3 through 5.
Okay, so let's say 3 through 5, and even in kindergarten, right?
Yeah.
Mostly. But 3 through 5, they need to be moving, dancing, painting, climbing, playing, free playing, digging in the sand. They need to be talking. They need to be listened to. They need to be listening to stories, singing,
Telling stories.
Anything but sitting down to fill out information on a piece of paper. Now, does that mean they shouldn't be drawing and they shouldn't be? Of course not.
Yeah, there's always paper and
There's
pencils
always
available.
Crayons, paper, pencils, all of those things. Very important and available to children. But never, ever would I believe it's okay to walk into a classroom for children 5 and younger and for them to be sitting at a table filling out a worksheet. Ever. I just think that's an easy no-brainer. We just don't do that.
Right.
Absolutely. So when you get into kindergarten, they're very, very rarely used.
Agreed.
We will use a worksheet, and this is the only time, in my opinion, they should be used. We'll use a worksheet that's just a very gentle way for them to record information. For example, one of my favorite things they do with subtraction in the cottage here, our kindergarten, is the bowling game. Can you talk about how they use a worksheet for the bowling game?
Yeah, so the teacher does make copies, so I guess it classifies as a worksheet, and they're all the same, but after the concept of subtraction has been introduced through storytelling, one of the ways that we practice it, because there should be multiple ways, and
a lot
of repetition.
This way comes far down in the process.
Right. They can do a little bowling with miniature bowling, and the worksheet or scorecard, as we call it, says 10 minus. They'll fill in the number of pins they knock down, and then they'll record how many pins are still standing. So we call it a scorecard, and that's just a way of giving them the chance to work with the equation on paper.
Right. And another math example of that in our kindergarten is when they record patterns. They create patterns sometimes, and they'll record patterns. Can you think of other times they use a worksheet in there? Nicole started our kindergarten here and led the kindergarten for how many years? 6 years?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 9.
Okay, 6 or 9.
6 or 9. Yeah, I mean, patterns, so they're making one with blocks and then recording it. I'm trying to think of another way, and I just can't really.
But because there are so few.
Right.
So few ways, but they can have a benefit when the children are engaged, when they're recording some kind of information. And of course, we want them to practice paper pencil work. However, it's very developmentally inaccurate to expect children in kindergarten to do a lot of heavy pencil paper work.
I agree.
Can they do it? Yes. Some of them can. Not all of them, but can they? A lot of them can. That doesn't mean it's the right thing.
Right.
Just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Right.
And it's our job as the adults to hold those boundaries. So now when we get into children through 3rd grade, our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders, they are, as they move through, especially the 2nd semester of 2nd grade and through 3rd grade, they're increasing their amount of paper pencil work because it's very important to record your learning. And those things need to happen.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in general, for that age children, for worksheets in particular? And then after that, I want to talk about handwriting and how that's a little different.
So in 1st through 3rd grade, it does gradually increase, but before that, we do a lot of work on chalkboards because that's good for their
pincer grasp and to do resistance against the
pressure on
chalkboard.
it. Yeah.
We want them to apply pressure to writing. So there are all these things before worksheets that are getting them ready to use the paper pencil application. Right. So they use chalkboards. Well, in the preschool and freely in the preschool, they use chalkboards to do uppercase letters in the kindergarten, and then they continue that into the primary years.
Yeah, maybe having a strip of paper with an equation on it that they're going to use base 10 blocks or another manipulative like a rec and rec to solve and then record their answer. But it's not a whole page of them. It might just be 1 or 2.
Right. And then increasing as they increase developmentally.
Right, because it's more appropriate.
Right.
And their endurance for that task is
Mm-hmm.
increased. So,
And they're really focusing, so it's more of an engagement. And then as they're writing and they're writing prompts for their journals, those require more. So it's not a worksheet because it's not printed for our definition of worksheet.
right.
But they do increase their writing on paper. So it's not, we don't use worksheets. The children never work with paper. But we know that learning needs to, like I said, be in the body before it can be in the brain. It's got to be active. And then, of course, once the third graders are really learning multiplication and more, they're recording more addition, subtraction, multiplication, then they do have an increase in worksheets that they fill out.
Yes. And even, so let's say we're graphing. That needs to be recorded on paper. We might do them together on big paper, but eventually, individually, they're going to be creating their own graphs, and that will be done on a worksheet, I guess.
Yeah, that's another way that is done. And then as the children move into our homeschool hybrid program for 4th through 8th graders, there, of course, we know that through 3rd grade, children are learning to read, and then after that, they're reading to learn. So by the time they all level out at the end of 3rd grade academically, for the most part, they're really ready to read to learn. They've become lovers of reading. And they are just so happy to be able to read and engage in whatever material. So then they're going to be doing more worksheets, especially in math, I think. But we can't replace the hands-on piece.
Right.
We still have to be building math minds with hands-on experiences and interaction with rich materials and manipulatives. That doesn't really ever lose its value.
I agree.
That has to be a piece. But as children get older, that time spent with those materials can be to demonstrate an experience for just a shorter amount of time, and then you're going to be recording what you learn and solving problems on paper.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. There might be a worksheet for grammar. There might be spelling, things like that, which they have. Our children in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, our primary group, they also have spelling lists, and they write those, and so that would be a worksheet.
Right. Handwriting, you were going to talk about
Let's
handwriting.
talk about handwriting. It's not really a worksheet for our kids. There are a lot of handwriting books, and I'm a little bit on the fence about that. I don't think it's completely inappropriate for children in those early primary grades to have access to a handwriting workbook and maybe use that. But I think there are better ways, and I think that our way is better. So can you share, just for the purposes of information supporting that, our way is a better approach, in my opinion?
Getting ready, even, let's talk about getting ready to, even before you ever have a pencil in your hand, all the things we do school-wide to increase hand strength, natural opportunities to be using the pincher grasp,
shoulder rotation, vertical surfaces. We know there's so much that goes into the sensory systems and what they're able to do, that just you're giving them an environment where these things are built intentionally, and knowing that then they're ready to move into the writing on paper, etc.
Right. And so in kindergarten, they do build the letters first and then use chalkboards, like you mentioned. And then, of course, the ones that love to write will be doing writing for their journal or writing things that are important to them. We have this, later is better.
Later is better.
Slower is better. And so we wait to introduce the lowercase letters in 1st grade. And so we do a lot of working with strokes and getting the wrist rotation ready, and then we move into lowercase letters. And
we want to make sure that motor memory is proper and that we're not having to relearn strokes and things like that. So we really want to build those neural pathways for that motor memory to be, this is how you make that motion with your wrist.
Right.
So sorry.
Right. No, that's great. We use, instead of the lines with the dotted middle, we use a softer, lighter line to make sure they're getting to the top and going to the bottom or below the line, but it looks just a little bit different. It's a little bit bigger. And then as we've done it bigger, then it's going to be natural to go smaller and smaller.
And we know the smaller the child, the bigger the paper is one of our mantras here, right? So as the children develop and grow, they can work on smaller smaller spaces. They can work in smaller spaces on smaller paper.
Right.
But that is a process that we go through. So it's just naturally embedded in their curriculum for second and third grade.
Yeah.
And we're also really intentional, and worksheets tend to do this. They have so much visual clutter. And it's just way too much for the brain, the eyes to process, for tracking visually. So it can have a lot of clutter and be very difficult for younger children, even in first and second grade. That just can be a very overwhelming visual palette. So we make sure in the way that the lines are drawn that they're gentle and that they naturally decrease in size until by the third grade they're using regular wide ruled notebook paper.
Yeah, and the transition is smoother. It's not frustrating for them. They're ready for it, and so it just happens.
Yeah, and so we've kind of gotten a little bit off topic, but that's okay because really I think it does talk to what worksheets and why you're not going to see them in a school that has a developmental approach. And so those are some of the reasons and some other ways that they're recording their work, and that we do start to offer those as they get older, because it's not the worksheet after worksheet after worksheet. We're not sending home a pile where the children just sat there and just mindlessly pretty much engaged with filling out forms.
Right.
It's a very active, you should in the classrooms for children third grade and younger have a very active space where they're moving. So worksheets just aren't conducive to that. So now, you will have some children, and one of my children loved a worksheet. So, if you're putting out some workbooks or worksheets at home or what have you, even in the classroom, if you had a pile of them for the children who enjoy them, there's nothing wrong with that. But I would be extremely cautious about the content of the worksheets, that what they're doing in the activities is appropriate. I think a beautiful worksheet to offer them, and we're working on carrying some of these in our store soon, I hope, are things that they do eye tracking activities, in the old highlights magazines. I think they still do this, but what's missing in this picture? They used to be in the Sunday morning cartoons. And so every Sunday growing up, we would open that up as kids, and we would find what's different from this picture to this picture. And those things have so much value. So activity books like that, I'm not a huge fan of coloring books where everything's drawn for the children. But, that's not up to me, I guess. And I'll tell you why real quick. Because it really is creating a model, and I touched on that earlier. It's like, of course, an adult's or a computer's going to draw a sophisticated comparatively for a child, a sophisticated drawing of a tree or a bear or a dog or a castle or whatever.
Right.
So giving children the ability to build some confidence in doing that on their own has great value. So
yeah, if you've had so much experience sitting down with a coloring page, and then you're asked to maybe draw something, you think, I don't know how to draw that.
It also really limits what you do draw. Mm-hmm. We grew up with lots of coloring books and they have a therapeutic sense. So I would say you get a coloring book for them that's got designs to fill in or patterns or things like that, but not objects that most children could not successfully draw, and they're actually so limited after that, because then castles begin to look like that coloring book, and it's really an interesting phenomenon. There's a really great study, which I know we'll talk about in another podcast, I'm just certain, but about a girl who was followed all the way through her childhood, and she loved to draw horses, and how they made sure they never showed her a picture of a horse to draw. She saw horses, obviously, but there was never a model for her to copy, and they just tracked the development of her drawing of horses over the years, and it was really interesting. And then there's another child that was, and it might have been the same child, I'm going to have to go back and look, but we'll just say it was another child for the sake of this conversation, who liked to draw houses and was drawing houses, and then when she was, 5-ish, someone drew a house for her, and she only drew them like that from then on. Isn't that very interesting? And so true. We see that time and again. Once you tell a child something, you rob them of learning. They may know but they don't really know. They haven't learned it. So it's going to be more fleeting and it's not going to stick.
Right.
So let's see. We've talked about why worksheets are not a good choice. We've talked about when they might be appropriate, right?
Right.
And I mean, that's definitely important.
We've talked about what the youngest children should be doing instead of them.
Absolutely. And again, even through early childhood, through those first 3 years in the primary years, they should be doing a lot more physically engaging materials and experiences than paper and pencil work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then you just gradually do that. So now when you get into older children too, I think that something to be so cognizant of is note-taking over filling out worksheets. Really, you can fill out worksheets. They can be a good study tool. They can, all of that, they can reinforce and help you take notes. But if we would teach children to be effective note takers, they would be able to be more successful learners. There's lots of research that tells us that older children, anyone into adulthood, you remember more when you write it and not type it on a keyboard, but you remember it more, you remember it better. That's a much better way to study. I think when you get into high school and the teachers who say, okay, you can use this index card front and back, loved that.
Oh, I crammed so much on there. Yeah.
I mean, we could never read that today. But what a brilliant gift of learning, because what we know is when you write it down, you are much more likely to remember it. So you'd gone through the lecture and you'd probably filled out the worksheets and you'd taken notes in class, hopefully. But then you had that last effort. That's a much more effective practice for tests than drill and kill. And, because you're writing it down and it's getting embedded in your brain. But that's, like I said, high school.
Right.
We cannot get the development out of order. There's no glory to filling out worksheets. That doesn't make anybody smarter because they can.
Worksheets don't make you smarter.
I shouldn't say that, but I think that working on paper definitely can increase your memory. It won't make you smarter. It's not going to make you a thinker. It's not going to make you a problem solver, even if you're giving a thinking question, because we know there's an argument for everything, right? So understanding that there's a lot more going on and there's just better ways. We keep going, well, what can we do differently? What can we do better? Oh, how about we honor the development? How about we don't get that out of order? How about we remember that they're going to learn in their own time and we can't force that? How about we get to know every child and we celebrate their wins in their time, and we throw out our calendars of checklists that, benchmarks.
Right.
Until benchmarks are aligned with the age, the chronological age, very specifically and intentionally, and are following the child on a trajectory of learning, I don't see how they have a place.
I agree. You heard it here first.
First time. Brand new information.
Thanks for joining us today to talk all things worksheets. Like and follow us here, and join us at the Save Childhood movement, savechildhood.org, where you can learn more about the 14 tenets that we really believe everyone can do to help save childhood. Follow and like us on social media, and we'll see you next time.
Have a great day, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more and join the movement, go to savechildhood.org.